All right. So 9 a.m. Guess we could start. Morning, folks. My name is Ángel Pérez. I'm a PM for the Azure deployments team. Joined here by my colleagues Sydney Smith and Shenglong Lee, and we're going to be talking about Bicep, more advanced topics today. So this is a Bicep deep dive session. Just as a fun fact, we all added our VS Code color schemes here. Shenglong is always putting us ahead of the times with the latest and greatest in terms of the colors as well as the extensions. So we have some extra time towards the end. I'm pretty sure the whole 90-minute session of demo can be spent Shenglong just showing extensions that he's gathered over the years. All right, agenda. So we'll talk about stacks, Bicep extensibility, and the Bicep type system. All right, for this, we expect y'all to know a few things, but if there's something that you're not familiar with at any point in time, please feel free to just raise your hand, stop us. We'll head over with a mic and get your question here. So if you're brand new to Bicep, we did a Bicep 101 session earlier this week. I recommend looking at that video. Alex goes into a lot of detail of how to use Bicep pretty much from scratch, all the way to leveraging other pieces of tooling like AVM and whatnot. So I highly, highly recommend that session. All right. With that, I'll hand it over to Shenglong for the Bicep type system. And again, please feel free to ask any questions as we're going through this.
Hey everyone, good morning. I'm Shenglong from the Bicep team. So today I'm going to talk about Bicep type system. So let's get started with a short introduction to the Bicep type system. The first thing to mention is that Bicep is a strongly and statically typed language. What this means is that the type of every parameter, variable, output, and resource property is known at compile time. This is essential for catching issues early to save time because you don't have to deploy the template to get feedback. The other thing to learn is that Bicep implements what's called a structural type system. This means that types are validated based on their structure, not their name. For example, if two objects have the same shape, meaning the same properties with the same value types, they are considered compatible. This makes the type system much more flexible and easier to work with, which I'll show a demo later to prove that. So why does typing matter in Bicep? First of all, as I mentioned, because because Bicep is statically typed, it can help catch mistakes early at compile time before anything is deployed. This reduces the chance of running into errors at runtime, which saves time and frustration. Secondly, typing enables auto-completion and inline documentation in editors. So if the types are known, tools like Visual Studio Code can provide intelligence and guide you as you write your code. And finally, typing is essential because it can improve readability and maintainability, especially in a large project that tend to grow. Because when types are clearly defined and enforced, you or someone else can come back later at some point and look at the code and understand what the code is doing and why. Next up, let's talk about the available types in Bicep. In types, currently there are two categories of types, the built-in types and the user-defined types. The built-in types that are the ones that come out of the box. These include primitive types such as string, integer, Boolean, object, array, and two secure types, secure string and secure objects. Those are usually used to annotate parameters that accept confidential information or such as a password. And Bicep also understands ARM resource types. Those are the types that you usually use when you are declaring a resource. On the other hand, Bicep also supports user-defined types. So user-defined types are just custom types that you define yourself to make your code more modular and reusable. For example, here we have a type definition for a disk configuration object for the properties name, size in gigabytes, and logic unit number. So using user-defined types like this not only helps with validation, but also makes your template much easier to reason about, which I'll demo as well later. So let's talk about type decorators. Type decorators in Bicep are special annotations that you can apply to types and type properties to provide additional metadata and restrictions. For example, the description decorator allows you to add helpful comments, which will show in an editor tooltip, which can be very helpful sometimes when you are dealing with a new type and you don't know what the property is doing. So it tells you the purpose of the type. Discriminator is really used in a tagged union or a discriminated union. It tells the type system which variant is currently in use. Export marks a type as exportable so that you can import it in another module. This essentially makes a type reusable across modules. Sealed marks an object as sealed so that you're limiting the object to the properties that you defined with no extra allowed. Secure is used to mark a string or object as sensitive. This is really used for a password or a token. And we also have other decorators such as min length and max length that can be applied to strings and arrays. Similarly, there's a min value and max value that can be used on numbers or specifically integers. In a word, type decorators provides a way to enhance your types to make your template more robust and improves type safety. And finally, I want to briefly mention about utility types. In Bicep, currently, we provide two utility types, the resource input and resource output. Resource input is typically used in parameter declarations. And it represents the input shape of an ARM resource type. This is particularly useful when you want your parameter type to be a resource property type. And resource output is really used in outputs where you want to reference a resource property after a deployment. So the difference between resource input and resource output is that resource input sometimes can include write-only properties or secrets, like a password. But those will get omitted in the resource output because the resource provider usually don't return those in their GET response. But resource output can also have other additional properties like a timestamp, which is read-only and it's not set by the user, but by the service. So yeah, now that we've covered all the key concepts of Bicep type system, let's jump right into a demo and I'll just show you guys how types can be used to improve a Bicep module. Let me stop sharing my slides and go to Visual Studio Code. I'll make this bigger. So is the size okay for everyone? Cool. But before I go over the code, may I ask how many of you have used Bicep or are familiar with Bicep modules? Okay, great. Great to see the number of hands. Yeah, so for those of you who are not familiar with Bicep, Bicep has a concept of modules. So basically every file in Bicep is a module, which means you can reuse the file, you can reference the file in a different file. And you do that by declaring a module. And you can reference the file for multiple times in the same file to make it reusable. So right here on my screen, I'm just showing you guys a very simple module called vm.bicep. And as you can see, for demoing purpose, it only contains a VM resource that is very naive. It's not realistic because it only has an OS profile property that is created just for this demo. So I have a set of parameters. There's the name for the VM, the location, and the rest of the parameters are used to populate this OS profile object, right? But if you look at the setup, the current setup, there are a few issues. So the first issue is that the type of the Linux configuration and the Windows configuration is object, which is very loose. So if I were to go to my main.bicep file that references this VM module, as you can see, I have two module declarations. One for creating a Windows VM and the other for creating a Linux VM. So for the Windows VM, I have Windows configuration, and for the Linux VM, I have Linux configuration, which is the parameter that I defined in my module, right? So because the type of Windows configuration and Linux configuration is object, Bicep knows nothing about the shape of the type. Well, GitHub Copilot help provide some feedback, but if I were to trigger code intelligence with control space, there's no suggestions, which is expected. So let's fix that with custom types. So actually, there are two ways of refine the type here. One is to define your own custom type. You can just create an object and populate some properties there. But you need to do that. You need to figure out the exact type of the configuration, right? So to figure out that, what you can do is to leverage Bicep's completion feature. You can just replace the current value for Linux configuration with an object, and then Bicep will provide a list of available properties, and then you can go ahead and check all the types of them, and then just use that to construct your custom types. But that is not ideal. A better way of fixing that is actually to use the utility type that I mentioned earlier, specifically the resource input utility type. So I'm going to do that. Just type resource input, and then I want to use the same exact VM type that I'm using here. Well, GitHub Copilot provides some hints, but it's not 100% accurate. So I can just fix it myself. So what I'll do is I just do resource input. I give it the exact type string for the VM, and I'll do .properties .os profile .linux configuration with a question mark. Oh, I forgot to mention that question mark here and here means that the parameter is nullable, or the type is nullable, meaning the parameter is optional. You can provide a null value, or you don't have to specify the value. And they mean the same thing. Similarly, I'm going to fix the Windows version. Okay, this time Copilot did a great job. So yeah, I think that now that we fixed the parameter types, let's go back to the main.bicep file and trigger code intelligence. And now, as you can see, it is able to show me the available types. Let's try that for the Linux VM as well. Yep, it's a different set of properties. So that's working. Great. Let's now go back to our VM module. But one thing I noticed is that this I'm like repeating myself because I have a reference to the OS profile twice, and it's quite lengthy. So I think I can do a quick refactoring to extract the common type here. So I just create a new type called OS profile properties equals, and I'll just copy this, paste it, and remove the Linux configuration section. And that means that I can replace this with OS profile properties.linux configuration. And replace this with OS profile.windows configuration ? So nice. So that addresses issue number 1. But if you look closer, there's another issue. And that is Linux configuration and Windows configuration are not mutually exclusive. This means that if I were to specify a Linux configuration for the Windows VM, Bicep doesn't tell me, hey, this is not allowed. But if I were to deploy the template, the compute resource provider will give me an error. So it'll be nice to catch that. And actually, this problem can be solved with a type feature called tagged union or discriminated union, which will allow you to select only one variant. So now let's go ahead and address that. So the first step I want to do is to create 2 types for the Linux configuration and the for the Linux OS profile and the Windows OS profile. So I just go ahead and type Windows OS profile equals an object, and I'll copy everything inside OS profile. Oops, copied the wrong thing. And I'll change the properties to be their type. And for the Windows OS profile, I don't need the Linux configuration, so I'm going to delete that. And here the Windows configuration is OS profile properties.windows configuration. And I'll give it a question mark to mark it as optional. I'll create a similar one for the Linux configuration. And change this to Linux configuration and Linux configuration. So cool. Now that I have 2 OS profiles, I want to create a union of them. But instead of just union the 2 objects, I want to create a tagged union, which means that I need to, the union needs to have a common property that's used as the discriminator or the tag. So, which means I will need to create 2 wrapper types of the 2 OS profile types. So I'll go ahead and do that and call this Windows OS profile, or this Windows OS config equals, I'll give it a kind Windows. And then OS profile is just the Windows OS profile we just created. Similarly, I need the wrapper for the Linux config. Again, GitHub Copilot is doing an amazing job. So next, now that I have 2 wrapper types for them, I'm going to create a union of the 2 types, and specifically a discriminated union. So I just name my type OS config equals Windows OS config or Linux OS config. But since this is a tagged union or discriminated union, I need to specify the discriminator. And this is where the discriminator decorator comes into play. And here, because the property of is called kind, I'll just supply the name of the property to be the discriminator. So yeah, now I have the OS config type. What I'll do is I'll just add a new parameter called param OS config with the type being OS config. And next, I'm going to remove the whole OS profile object and replace that with OS config dot OS profile, which means I can remove all the parameters that is not in use. So I can just remove them. So yeah, now our parameters list becomes shorter. But if I go back to main.bicep you'll see that this actually improves typing, because if I remove the old parameters and supply OS config, now as soon as I type the colon, Bicep is now showing me 3 completion items: the required properties for Linux and the required properties for Windows. This is driven by the discriminated union type that we just created. So for the Windows VM, I can just go ahead and select required properties, Windows, hit enter. And now, as you can see, it populates the kind, which is Windows, and then the OS profile for Windows. And similarly, I can trigger code completion, OS config. For the Linux VM, I just select the required properties -Linux. Yep. And so this with this setup, you no longer have the ability to specify both the Linux configuration and the Windows configuration for your VM, which solves the mutually exclusive issue. So yeah, I think there's one more thing that we can improve with this setup. So if you look at admin password, it's because it's a password. It's a secret. We need to mark it as secure, right? So let me go ahead and fix that. And also one more thing that we can improve is that if we go back to the original VM module, I have a backup here. If you hover over admin password, you notice that there are actually some length constraints, and they're different depending on the OS platform. For example, on Windows, the minimum length is 8, but on Linux, it's 6. And the max length is different as well for Windows and Linux. Actually, with our tagged union type, we can express this. We can actually go ahead and use the min and max length decorator to annotate the admin password for Linux and Windows separately. So for Windows, I'm going to add a min length 8 and add max length 123. Going to copy those over to the Linux OS profile, change this to 6, and change the max length to 72. Now, if we go back to Bicep, min.bicep, you'll see that this admin password is already flagged because the length is less than 8. So if I add 2 asterisks, the error should go away. So yeah, hopefully that's basically my demo, and hopefully that shows you guys how Bicep type system is capable of, improve type safety and enhance the authoring experience. All right, cool.
Thank you, Shenglong. So we just saw a little bit about how you could build in your own validation, maybe validation regarding specific limitations like password length limitations, or it can also be more business logic specific that your customers might have, and you can build that validation into the Bicep file with the type system. All right, let's dive right back in here. All right, so I'll be talking to y'all about deployment stacks. Raise of hands very quickly to see how many of you have used deployment stacks before or have heard about deployment stacks. Okay. All right, so to set the tone, I guess, what are deployment stacks? And before even answering that, I want to start with what were the challenges that we saw that were existing out there that kind of ended up resulting in the solution that we call deployment stacks today. So in terms of resource lifecycle management, how many of you have had problems with either a customer or someone on your team that accidentally deleted something they weren't supposed to? And if I don't see you raising your hand, then I'm very excited for you. You're lucky. Okay, so that's one common thing. It often is because that app team that you gave access to needs access to be able to do their things, but sometimes that access is just enough for them to do the wrong thing. And once you're in that state, it's kind of harder to get back and time gets lost. So another thing aside from stuff getting deleted accidentally, how often do you find yourselves redeploying customer environments or tearing down customer environments, cleaning those up? Raise of hands. Okay, awesome. So those two were the main challenges that we set out to make easier with deployment stacks. And let me, I guess, talk about this a little bit more visually. So when we say, and let me put this in presentation mode, because I'm very proud of the animation I added. So deployment stacks, regular deployment lingo in Azure. We have our management groups, we have our subscriptions, we have our resource group scopes. And today you're all familiar with the deployment commandlets that exist of new AZ resource group deployment. So deployment stacks was built in a way for it to be seen as the evolution of that already familiar deployment commandlet. So essentially we have the same set with stack at the end. And what it's meant to be thought of as is a very simple way to deploy templates, similar to the one you're already used to, that brings two new capabilities into the fold just by using deployment stacks. And that's what we're going to talk about today in this demo. So those two capabilities, more specifically, address those challenges that we talked about separately. So the first challenge of lifecycle management, of having to go and redeploy an environment or tear down an environment, and sometimes that being per scope and being a more taxing operation than it should be. That's going to be something that you can address with what we call action on managed and deployment stacks. And more importantly, let's stop folks from deleting stuff that they're not supposed to delete. That's where the deny settings mode of the stack is going to help with that. But no more slides. Let's dive right into a demo. All right, so is this big enough? Should I zoom in a bit more? All right, cool. Okay, so let's take a look at what it looks like to create a deployment stack. So as I mentioned, we can create stacks at all these different scopes. And what's going to happen is that stack resource, this is a new resource type, that resource is not only going to deploy the template that you gave to it, but it's also going to live in the scope that you submitted the deployment to. And you can think of the stacks resource as a resource that keeps track of the state of that collection that you represented in that Bicep file. So for this example, let's do a stack deployment at subscription scope. So what I'm going to be doing here, and I'm going to walk you all through, is first off the name of the stack. Second, we have action on unmanaged, and this is set to detach all, which we'll see in a minute what that ends up meaning. And deny settings mode, which for now is just set to none. Pass in a Bicep file and a location for this. So I'm going to run this, although I had run it already before. So as that takes a while to run, I'm just going to look at the output above to kind of start breaking this up. So first thing I want y'all to notice is the ID. So the deployment stack is a resource on its own. So it has an ID, and you can use RBAC to block folks from even seeing this thing. So if you are moving towards the maturity step of I want to package my environments in a way that my customers can easily redeploy them, you want to also block them from editing that file that creates that environment. So now that the stack is resource type, you can do that easily with varback as you would block access to any other resource. So here I want to point out this section. So I had added detach all for action on unmanaged. And what that does, it essentially tells the stack resource, hey, if a resource becomes unmanaged or taken away from this template, this is what you have permission to do to that resource. So right now it's all set to detach for all scopes. So this means any resource group, or management group that gets removed from my template, if on the next stack update that's not there, the stack is going to say, all right, this resource is no longer managed. What can I do? Detach. And detach just means break the association from the stack resource, but let the resource continue living in Azure. And there will be reasons for wanting to do that, and we'll see that in a bit. All right, so very quickly, what I just wanted to point out is you'll get a list of the resources that were created, and this list can be thought of as the managed resources list. So all the resources that are represented in this template that we have up here. So I got 4 resource groups and 4 different modules that make a call to another Bicep file that creates a couple storage accounts. All of these would be considered managed resources. So let's take a look at that a little bit more visually. So here in the portal, we can see that we have all of those resources created. So we have all the different RGs and storage accounts in them. And the deny status of this is set to none because my deny settings mode was set to none. So let's say, for example, I am a developer on some app team. I'm bored that day. I got access to a bunch of new stuff, including the storage account. And, for whatever reason, I'm like, hey, I don't think I need this storage account anymore. Let me try and delete it. So today, we could easily do that by doing a remove AZ storage account, and I'm just going to call out that storage account that we were looking at. Since I have access to that storage account, there shouldn't be a problem with this here. This should succeed, and that storage account will be accidentally deleted. So I might actually just stay here for this one. Oh, this succeeded already. So we can also take a look in our stack. If we refresh, there will be a storage account missing. So how do we prevent this from happening? So if we were to rerun our update of the stack, so let's suppose now we want to do a deny setting. We can set this deny setting to one of 2 things. We can either deny deletes or deny write and delete. So if I rerun this, what's going to happen is the stack is going to take a look at that list again. It'll first say, is there any resource that became unmanaged in this step? If no, then nothing gets done with action on unmanaged. And it moves on to create and attach the deny assignment to all of the resources there. So what's going to happen after this runs is, even though I have access to those storage accounts, if I go and try and delete that either through the portal or in the CLI, I'm going to get blocked. It's going to say, hey, great that you have access, but unfortunately there's a deny assignment on this resource that belongs to this stack that's preventing you from doing this. Let's take a look at this here. So as we can see, we got a status of deploying for the stack, and our details for the deny assignment are going to be here. So we can see it's already been set to deny, write, and delete. And this is a blanket, everyone gets blocked. Doesn't matter if you have access. Later on, there might be cases where you're like, hey, the admin on this team should probably have access in emergency cases to be able to go in and either update or delete a resource. And in those cases, there's an ability to add certain exclusions, which we'll see in a bit. But let's take a look here again. And as this runs, please feel free to ask any questions as I'm going through this. Actually, one quick thing that I can show. So as I mentioned, stacks live at each individual scope it gets deployed to, right? So this stack is a subscription scope stack, and I deployed it to this specific subscription. So similar to deployments, which we have today, deployments are records that get stored at that given scope. And you can go reference back what that deployment did, what the template was. Right below this, as again, we're meant to see stacks as an evolution of deployments, we have our deployment stacks. So if I go here to that subscription scope and look for my stack, I'll be able to find that easily. This is taking a bit longer to deploy than expected. That's okay. I'm gonna keep showing here what we can do on this next update. So while this finishes, what I'm aiming to show is how you get blocked by a deny setting, but for the sake of time, I'm gonna bake in the change for the next command that I'm gonna issue. So denying folks from accessing resources, cool. That's one challenge taken care of. The next thing is how do we clean up stuff more efficiently or faster? So when you're cleaning up scope by scope, imagine if I'd have to go to each of these resource groups here, one by one, and delete a set of storage accounts that are there present. And this happens in a variety of cases. We've heard from customers, hey, sometimes I need to delete because there's a bunch of test environments that we did and we don't need it anymore. The MVP is done. This needs to get torn down so no more costs get incurred. By using stacks to build those environments, you can very easily clean that up with a single command towards the end of that project. If you want to be more surgical about what gets deleted in the environment you're representing in Bicep, you can do that easily by just commenting that out or removing it. So for example, I'm just going to take this set of storage accounts here and this set of storage accounts here, and I'm going to leave the ones in the PowerShell RG and in the networking RG. Going to save this. And gonna wait maybe another second for this deployment to go through, and if not, I'm gonna terminate it and restart it. Any questions from folks? All right, this luckily stopped. All right, let's give it another go. So I baked in the other thing I was going to demo in a separate command, but since the demo gods are not in my favor, let's try this out in one command. Okay, so what I did now is I just added an action on unmanaged state of delete resources. And we had already added the deny write and delete for the deny setting. So what happens here as I submit this, it's gonna let me know, hey, just so you know, resources that are no longer managed, the stack has permission to do these two things. Delete resources and attach resource groups. Is that good with you? I'll say yes. And let's see how this one goes.
Question,
Um,
Resource be in multiple stacks and be managed.
it can. We don't recommend it. And it's mostly because you don't want to accidentally end up in a state where you're locking a resource with something from another resource. Like, for example, you might have a stack that manages the storage account and then another one that does that as well, but the deny setting from another one is preventing you from updating that one. And it can get out of hand very quickly, but it's not something that's blocked today.
What about the existing keyword, like an existing app configuration,
Mm-hmm.
multiple applications that manage under this, or is it?
The existing keyword in Bicep, um, I think that's more of a function of the language than of the stack service or the deployment service itself. Correct me if I'm wrong, Alex.
No, that's right. It wouldn't be managed by the stack at that point because it's just a reference to a resource that is out there and it's not in the list of stack managed resources.
Yeah.
Also, if that's stuff, you might want to try creating a net new stack with a different name.
Yeah, the good catch. Actually, let's do this. What I have here is in a non-terminal state. You're right. We're gonna have to create a new one from scratch, folks. So let's say PowerShell Summit 25 rocks. And here we go. And let me go and find that one here. Remember, you're always gonna get asked the yes question. So, yeah, it happens to me sometimes still that I don't press yes and go do something else and come back and the command's still there waiting for me. Sorry, question.
I've got a real hard one.
Mm-hmm.
What was the keyboard shortcut you used to comment out multiple lines?
I think it was Control/, right?
Control KC. Control say C,
Uh,
and then control.
it's a good question. From just Control/, yeah.
You can toggle on screencast mode, I think it's called, and
Mhm.
it'll actually show your keyboard shortcuts and what the command is in VS Code.
Oh, nice. Now we know. All right, this looks like it succeeded. The other stack got stuck in a terminal state, non-terminal state. That doesn't happen very often, but of course it needs to happen while I'm doing a live demo. All right, so we managed to get that created. We have our stack. We have the cleanup action set to delete for resources, and we have a deny, write, and delete. Let's go quickly here for the sake of time. All right, so we have our stack as I showed. Given that, I guess this is a new stack, so the resources weren't technically deleted because they weren't present there in the first place. But if I uncomment this, or let's actually just do this, we'll comment this one out, which is indeed managed by that. So if I rerun this, we're gonna see that another set of storage accounts got deleted. But before doing so, let me quickly show you what happens if I now go ask that app developer with new access that shouldn't be deleting things accidentally. I come in and attempt a delete. And you can see I get failed almost instantly. And it essentially lets me know you have permission to perform this action at this scope. However, there's a deny assignment that was created by this stack resource ID. So a user would know like, oh, okay, I'm getting blocked and this is where I'm getting blocked. So that's where we can quickly see an extra layer of security added to your resources and avoiding misconfigurations. Go for it.
Okay, more of a real question.
Mhm.
So that deny assignment, is that kind of like, is that like a policy-based thing, or is it kind of like, this is like a resource line, but is that happening as a result of kind of like policies or?
I wouldn't say policy. It is a deny assignment is a resource type of its own that we have internally and maybe someday externally. But that resource type gets created with the permissions that the stack has, and it gets assigned to every resource that's present in that template. So policy, however, policy has that ability to make changes to resources after they get deployed, or the deploy if not exist, or the modify effect. So what happens now if we have all these resources locked down with a stack, but we have a policy that needs to, change that cost center or change this other thing? With the deny settings excluded principles, you could exclude a given policy ID from being able to indeed make changes to the resources that are managed by a stack. And I was going to demo that, but as we're battling here with this, we'll see. Actually, as that deploys, I can show you quickly what that looks like. So here I have a policy. How many of you are familiar with Azure policy? Before I keep saying policy. Okay, cool, awesome. So I have a policy with a remediation task, and I notice here that this one failed. And I'm let know, hey, this failed because, again, you got denied because of the deny assignment that's owned by this deployment stack. So seeing this, I would go back to my deployment stack and add an excluded principal of that policy ID. So in my deny settings here, we see we have a deny settings mode of deny, write, and delete, but there's no principles excluded, no actions excluded. As this continues to go, I'll show very briefly what that ends up looking like. So if I were to type out new AZ subscription deployment stack, we have our deny, write, and delete. If I want to exclude a specific user from that deny assignment, I can do deny settings, excluded principles. Sorry, my terminal got stuck there. We can do deny settings, excluded principles. And here I can just pass in a specific ID of either that policy, a group, or a user. So for example, I might go and say like, hey, I do indeed need access to be able to make changes outside of the context of the stack. I can go ahead and grab my username. Oh, sorry, wrong search bar. Yes. Identities, right? Yep. So I can go here, grab this, and add it as a user to be excluded. Alternatively, you can say, hey, I don't want to block exclude a specific person, but I want to exclude a specific action. Like I want everyone in the organization to have the ability to write to storage accounts, but nothing else. I'm blocking every other action possible. So alternatively, we could do excluded actions and do something like Microsoft.storage accounts, /write. And with that, I, as a user, even though there's a deny, write, and delete, will be able to still write to the storage account types specified by that action. All right, fingers crossed this thing finished. Good. So very quickly to end this here, I'll show that the deployment that we were just doing, let's go back to our stack. As I mentioned, we can find the stack by going to the scope that we submitted the deployment to. I submitted this stack to the subscription scope. And, oh, sorry, wrong stack. All right, so we can see that this group of storage accounts got deleted just by me commenting out that block earlier and redeploying the stack. So now imagine if you have like these huge files representing your environment or some customer's environment. You can now more surgically go finding specific resources in those files or resources that got flagged in some security incident. You can Control F, find that resource, and easily remove it from your template. To end it here, I'm just going to delete the stack and show you.
Can I ask a question really quick?
Yeah.
I guess I was going to lead the question into you've been redeploying using the Bicep in VS Code.
Mm-hmm.
Just some admins are, hey, I want to try to do some stuff in the portal and some doesn't in code. So is that the edit, and what does the edit look like in the stack form? Can you edit the deployment a stack outside of just, hey, where's the Bicep for that stack? And I know it exists, and if I want to make changes to it, I can find the original Bicep that created it, and like, okay.
I'm going to ask your question a bit differently. I think what you're saying is, can we edit the deployment stack resource in the Bicep file?
Do you have to have the original Bicep file that generated the stack
Uh-huh.
to make changes to that stack?
Uh,
Other admin deployed a stack.
uh-huh, uh-huh.
I don't have that Bicep.
No, you'd be able to edit and redeploy here in the portal if you'd wish. I think the file itself can be provisioned in different ways. Some folks are using template specs. Some folks are, using their own Git. But if it's meant to be like, hey, whatever you have here, you can redeploy that, and what you have in the portal works for that.
Okay, thank you.
Can I add one?
Yeah.
I think the practice is you want to keep that connection. Like you want to be managing that code in source control and using that, always pushing from that as your source. If in a pinch, Angel's right, you can edit it from the portal, but that would mean something has gone wrong in your kind of source control practices.
Yeah.
Can you remove the deny write through the GUI if worst case scenario?
You can redeploy the stack and mark the deny write to none.
So that has to be done through Bicep.
No, it can be done here in the portal. So you redeploy the stack, and the stack specific properties that get asked as parameters, you would just mark deny settings mode, none.
Angel, can you show that screen?
Yeah, I can show that screen very quickly. Let's actually go through here. All right, so if we go through the custom deployment experience and you load a template into context, this banner will pop up at the top showing the stacks create experience in the portal. It's still behind this banner because we're missing another scope as ability of deployment, which is management group scope. But after that, we have plans to make this GA. But right now, as you can see, you would get the stack name and the stack specific properties here. So what you mentioned, you would just set this to none and then redeploy. Good question though, because that reminded me of something that we didn't touch on earlier, which is deny settings require a separate role. So given they're very powerful, like all of a sudden we can have folks locking stuff down left and right, it's to edit or update a deny assignment, you need a specific role of stack owner. So I know I'm already have eaten into all the demo time, so I'm just gonna do this and we can take a quick look. So I'm going to delete the stack. We finished the demo. I don't need any of this anymore. I'm going to clean this up and not incur any costs. I have it set to delete resources and detach resource groups. So here's an example of maybe there's a situation where you provisioned part of an environment to a team and you want to leave them with the resource group structure that you created, but the resources are no longer relevant and you want to clean those up. You can easily do that with this mode here. So we're just going to say PowerShell Summit rocks and delete this stack. And as this goes, what's going to happen is all storage accounts are going to get deleted and these resource groups are going to be left behind. Any other questions? Go for it.
You said stack owner, not saying, maybe if there was a hypothetical subscription that had owner roles assigned to people, or better yet, contributor or something. Is there any other role, or is it specifically that is the only one?
It would be that one, the stack owner role. Let me see if I can show you real quick where it lives.
And owner. Owner has that too.
So that-
Contributor does not. That's the key thing.
Not that anyone would ever.
Right. Yeah, who would have owner?
No.
I'll stop your name after you. I know a guy.
All right, as we can see, all those storage accounts got deleted and these got detached. So these RGs continue to live and party on in this subscription, and everything else got cleaned up in just that single operation. I'll end it here because I already ate into most of Sydney's demo time. But if there's any other questions around stacks, I'll stick around. I can take a last one. Go for it.
You mentioned to add the right nice settings, you require the stack owner. But does that also, do you also require the stack owner to redeploy the stack, or just deploy any stack without the nice settings? So basically, do you require the stack owner for every stack also? Or
No, just the deny setting. So someone that has the need for cleaning up those test environments, it might be an app developer, might be someone that gets the permission to build out, as many OpenAI stuff that they want, but they want to clean it up very quickly at the end of that project. They can use action on manage for that without the need of needing deny assignments for any of that. Cool. Awesome. Thank you, folks.
Just use the podium. Yeah. Hello, everyone. This session goes until 10:30, right? Okay, we've got plenty of time. Get plugged in here. My name is Sydney. I'm excited to be here. I know a lot of you from the PowerShell space. I'm a PM both for PowerShell and Bicep. So if you're seeing me present Bicep, I'm not leaving PowerShell, but I do see a lot of synergies between Bicep and PowerShell. And I know in State of the Shell, there was kind of a theme of talking about you all as builders. And my hope is that you can see both PowerShell and Bicep as tools in your toolbox when managing Azure. So with that, I will be talking about Bicep extensibility today. So as you all know, Bicep is a domain-specific language that's traditionally been used to manage and deploy Azure resources. It's a transparent abstraction over ARM. And so the idea behind extensibility is pretty simple. It's extending this deployment plane beyond Azure resources. This is currently an experimental feature for Bicep. I'll show you how to enable it. But the key here with experimental feature, right, is this is a really good time for you to test it out, give feedback, and so we can make changes as necessary. So why would you use Bicep for Microsoft Graph or for Entra? Well, we've talked a lot about the benefits of Bicep today, like the type system and the simple syntax. You can also use all the existing tooling that is out there for Bicep today, like the VS Code extension, which provides you with those completions and linting. It also provides you with all the benefits of infrastructure as code with repeatable results, repeatable deployments. And one thing I did want to note here too is that if you aren't using other Azure services, there is still a way to use Bicep for Entra. So I see this as a great benefit both for folks who are already familiar with the Bicep syntax and are already using it for Azure to extend their knowledge and be able to use it for more resource types. But I also see it as a great way to bring folks into infrastructure as code who maybe aren't coming from Azure service background. So the support today is a bit limited, but there are some key resource types that you can see here. This is the list of supported resource types for Entra today. And you can obviously find this in the documentation. It's clearly a screenshot from there if you can't remember. And then you'll also see how the Bicep resource types are declared with that Microsoft.graph being the prefix. And we'll demo today showing how to use some of these. So why might you use this? I included a few example scenarios here, and all of these have quick start guides, which will also show you how to access. But I think the key point here is that there's a really nice intersection between when you're deploying infrastructure or managing Azure services and authentication at the same time. So these are all showing various ways to integrate those two scenarios. So I'll give you folks a second to read them. Cool. So I'll pause here. Any questions before we get into the demos? Simple so far? Okay, cool. We love demos. That's awesome. So you'll notice that we all use VS Code for our demos here. We're big fans. And there is the Bicep extension. So I did want to just make sure folks were aware of this. If you're new to Bicep or Bicep authoring, make sure you get that extension installed. Really simple, just use this extension marketplace. If you search for Bicep, you can get it installed there, and that's what's going to provide you with the linting, completions, that sort of thing. Everyone here familiar with VS Code? Yeah. Anyone use a different authoring tool for Bicep? That's cool. A little different than PowerShell, where we've got ISC versus VS Code. Here we're all VS Code, which is cool. So the first thing I wanted to show you was my Bicep config, and I have it really simple here, just showing how to enable the extensibility feature. So you'll see experimental feature enabled, true, and then I am also importing this extension here of Microsoft Graph for Bicep. And I will show you where this is in MCR or MAR as well. We go here. And who's familiar with the Microsoft Artifact Registry? A few folks. So this is pretty cool because it is another intersection point where both PowerShell is using MAR and Bicep. So it's a really good resource for you to be aware of. What's cool about MAR or MCR, you'll hear it called both. It was originally Microsoft Container Registry, and then they decided to kind of broaden the scope to contain more types of artifacts beyond just containers. So that's where the name Microsoft Artifact Registry comes from. But this is all Microsoft verified resources here. So if you're coming from the world of PowerShell, more familiar with, say, PowerShell Gallery, there might be more vetting that needs to happen to verify and trust publishers. What's great here with MAR, all Microsoft verified publishers. And then you can see some different versions here. To get this into my Bicep config, I just pulled the latest version, copy from here, pretty simple, and into my config. Now I have or you can see first I'm importing the extension here, but I have a super simple example of just creating Entra group using a managed identity as the owner. So this is a just simple example of combining a more traditional Bicep resource that you may be familiar with a Microsoft Graph resource. If we go to the portal here, you can see that I have my PS Summit 25 created, and I have my managed identity here as well. Now we can use PowerShell to deploy this. If you haven't already, make sure to connect AZ account so we have the authentication. And then you can use the commandlet new AZ resource group or whatever level of scope you're deploying at. So we can go ahead and run this. And you are going to get this warning that it's an experimental feature. So that's all that's basically saying there, but we know that we've decided to enable it. Cool. And then we had a successful deployment. You can see here. So I also do want to show, though, deploying a new resource as well. So if we go back here, this is what we have so far under PowerShell Summit groups, but we can create a new one. We're going to go ahead and create the group for next year, PS Summit 26. Just add some here, save the file, and then we can just redeploy using the same commandlet. Yeah, go for it.
Resource group, you're effectively and I saw like, hey, the location. What does that matter? Because it's intra, graph, it's global.
Yeah, so there's, I guess, multiple parts to it. So my resource group I'm using for the managed identity deployment, and then the Entra is separate from that. So you're still having the, I guess, existing.
What location it happens to be, or is it like, I don't know what.
It's a good question. Alex, do you?
I have this convenient microphone next to me now. So every Azure resource that lives in a resource group needs a location. So in Sydney's demo, she's creating a user-assigned managed identity, which is an Azure resource that has nothing to do with Entra.
Sorry, I just saw the groups at the bottom. I thought you were deploying the group itself. Sorry.
No,
You're doing both.
Go ahead.
So yeah, so in this template, we're both deploying the managed identity, and then we're using that in the group here that we're deploying as well. Does that make sense?
And the deployment itself, so in the command line arguments, there was a reference to a resource group. Maybe is that what you're referring to?
I was just trying to understand what the graph Entra ID group, where is that living in that space of, is it in a resource group? Because I kind of think of Entra as a separate product, then platform Azure in resource groups in that entire structure. And this was crossing that boundary. It really blew my mind in this whole weird, like, hey, I can do it.
It's a little funky. It's a little weird. So you are deploying to a resource group, but then you happen to be deploying some other thing that doesn't live in a resource group. In this case, the Entra group. Yeah. So there's no like tight coupling between those two things. It's just where the deployment happened to occur from.
Makes sense? Okay, cool. Any other questions right now? Making sense so far? Sorry, I think I just got really loud. Don't mean to yell at you all. Of course, things are always nice and slow when we're demoing here. So we have time for another question. Yeah. So that's a really great question to think about. And permissions can get a little bit tricky when you're using both Azure resources, deploying both Azure resources and Entra resources, because you need the correct permissions for both. And those are two different sets of permissions. So with the traditional Bicep resources, you'll need the permissions you would already need for the deployment there. And then with Entra, they have more granular permissions at the resource type level. So that's what you're also going to need in order to have this successful deployment. You want to take that?
Yeah, I mean, the answer is, I think, Sydney, in your demo, you also, or in your slides, you reference to like non-Azure deployments?
So I think there's two scenarios here. One is a scenario where you're an existing Azure user, say, and you have Azure subscription or you have other Azure services that you're using. In that case, you'll use your existing Azure subscription, and like, yes, you will need permissions to that resources group because that's where the deployment object would be. That being said, there is a scenario supported here where I mentioned, and this seems maybe hung. So let's go to the slides and we can talk about this. Yeah, so I mentioned earlier that it is possible to use this if you aren't using other Azure services. And in that case, there is a way that you can use the target scope in your Bicep file and send it to the tenant level. And then it won't require the Azure subscription permissions but it only works in the case that you don't have an associated Azure subscription. Does that make sense? Okay.
More along the lines of that scenario. So if you are like using only deploying some intra-ID, resource or the intra-ID screen or whatever,
Yeah.
Would you still need like a dummy resource group in order to perform that deployment? If I choose to deploy by using, the PowerShell command. So, for
Yeah.
example, or do you need to create a resource group in order to do the deployment? Because I believe in your example, you're making a resource group that's
So similar to that question, and like really
Yeah.
going to get, we as admins are deploying it, we have hundreds of subscriptions, it doesn't really matter. But effectively, I want to deploy to the tenant, I only want to affect Entra.
Right.
So where does that deployment live? How do I
Yeah.
that deployment? And so I guess I only target the tenant if I don't want it to go into a reference, if there's no reference to any of the subscriptions, I'm talking to Entra.
Right.
That's where I want to put, or AZDO, I think you can do that too.
Yeah, so I think one thing is we kind of just saw Angel's demo with Stacks, and Stacks support is being worked on for extensibility right now. It's not available today, but you could see in the portal, we could see the Stacks deployment object, right? There's also a non-Stacks deployment object, and so that will be associated with a particular subscription or resource group depending on how you deploy it. And so you will have that dummy, or like, I wouldn't call it a dummy necessarily as much as like, maybe you have a resource group associated with your Entra deployments would be an example way to set it up, right? And that's where the deployments themselves are going to live, but you're not creating any objects like new Azure resources within that resource group as part of the deployment. Does that sort of make sense? Okay. Cool. Well, we can try running this one more time. Cool. And then while this is running, I can show another example that I think is pretty cool of a way you could use this feature. So I pulled this again from the quick starts example. I'm not going to take credit for coming up with it or setting it up myself. But if you are using Bicep in CI/CD, which I have a session on later this afternoon and we'll talk about. So this was very top of mind for me when I saw this example because I was just setting this up myself. But if you need to set up credentials for your GitHub actions, Entra then provides you, the Entra support from Bicep provides you with a really great infrastructure as code way to repeatedly do this. So the details here are basically that you're configuring a federated identity credential. And then it allows you to then set that credential within GitHub. There's a great video on that I'll show you where to view it, but just wanted to kind of plug that scenario as well. We'll have the same simple config here, enabling the feature, and then a slightly more complex example, but still relatively simple to look at. We can see we're creating, application. got our credentials, service principal, and a role assignment. So this would be another cool use case, in my opinion. And while we're at that, we go back here. I think this finished running. Great. So we can see the new deployment is now here, PS Summit 26. We go here, go into the group, can view the group owners and see that it correctly made the example managed identity the owner. Great. And then I definitely wanted to just show this resource as well. I have a QR code and a couple of slides that'll help you get to this page. But if you're looking to get started with this, I do recommend looking at some of these samples as a way to obviously get started. And then I'll just show this really quick, even though there's not that much to show. But great video here on how to set it up with GitHub Actions. Great. Y'all are way too smart because you kind of hit on some of my next topics, which one was permissions. And again, this is a little bit tricky because you do have the two different types of permissions. We talked about this as well, how to deploy without an Azure subscription. Again, this is only if you aren't using other Azure services. I do want to mention that extensibility doesn't end with Microsoft Graph. There's also a Kubernetes extensibility that's in preview, and it allows you to deploy anything with the Kubernetes that can be deployed with the Kubernetes CLI and a Kubernetes manifest file. So what's next for extensibility? There's current work going on the Azure Key Vault data plane. We're also looking at potentially being able to set up your infrastructure in Azure DevOps using Bicep. As I mentioned, stack support for extensibility is being worked on, and also integration with GitHub Copilot. So your Copilot experience in the portal, you can get completions or responses that are accurate for the extensibility features as well. And then this QR code is just going to link you to the documentation for extensibility within the Bicep documentation set. Yeah.
So the second bullet point there, you mean like actually having Bicep to set up Azure DevOps stuff?
Yeah. So like for example, like your repos or like your infrastructure around your CI/CD system, that sort of thing.
Or the project itself and who owns it and all the different groups inside of it.
Yeah, and I wonder if that would even like there would be interactions between the different extensibility layers there.
Connections and all that.
Yeah, totally. You could kind of
And this repo to that app server.
yeah, exactly. So being able to configure that on like all the different levels. I know like I feel the pain there as I was mentioning setting up for the CI/CD system, getting all my credentials right in Azure and all of that and making it work with Azure DevOps and setting up that infrastructure over and over.
How many people, just a show of hands, would use an Azure DevOps provider in Bicep? Okay.
3 times.
Great.
Can that also include pipelines?
Yeah, exactly. I guess out of curiosity, is there any like hearing about extensibility and kind of what's available there? Is there any other like examples where you're like, oh, I just like really wish I could use Bicep to deploy X or Y? GitHub, yeah, SharePoint. Okay. Hey, now people can be wherever they are on the whatever they're using is cool.
So kind of coming back to even just what the first slide above all the extensibility was there, and I can screenshot it from there.
Yeah.
But the like service principles, all the enter groups and all of that, that's already GA right now today. That's available today. So that's still testing.
It's technically an experimental feature. As you noticed, so if we go
I'd love to deploy service principles. I'd love to deploy app registration.
I would say like I would call it like a go live preview. Like I think it's pretty safe to use.
Do you have the GA timeline in your presentation?
No.
So it's going to GA either in May or June. So what Sydney's demoing today will be fully supported by then.
By the time I wrap my head around all
Yeah.
this, it'll be fine.
No, you're going to be much faster than that. You're gonna have it in a second. But yes,
By the time I get home.
yeah.
Yeah, totally. Yeah.
Quick question, we saw the people doing the BSC V3.
Yeah.
Very excited about the fact they can use Bicep. Is that related to this extensibility, or is that something that's more native? They're using the native domain language.
Yeah, that's a really interesting question, and I think there's still some question marks, so to speak, around it. But I think one of the key differences is that, as you saw when I was demoing, I used the same commandlet that I would have if I was not using extensibility. So the deployment engine, so to speak, for Bicep has been extended into these other surface areas. The way that DSC works, there's more of a question mark if it has its own deployment engine, right? So it's using the same syntax, and you're still getting a lot of the same benefits of Bicep, like the infrastructure as code, the declarative language, all of these things. But there is a question mark as to like, will it have its own deployment engine, or deployment process would be another way of putting it. So I think that's still a design decision that's like we're in discussions with, but it looks like that direction, generally speaking.
I guess the next kind of, I'm thinking through just even usage of what we're going that is, it supports the native stuff for Bicep and what if at that point, so that I could effectively take all the service principles I currently have, all those app registrations, create a Bicep for them and do a what if, which ones do I have to add? So I could take all that stuff and like brownfield all that stuff into my infrastructure as code. There would be kind of a flow for that.
Yeah, there's
Like, there's just so much out there that we've been
where am I?
manually doing for so long. How do I bring that into code?
There's I'll reference. There is a documentation page on the process for onboarding existing resources onto Bicep. So I would start here. Yeah, cool.
What if doesn't work yet for extensible resources stuff?
Okay. Well, yeah. What if is my kind of go to? Hey, try this, and oh, I didn't deploy anything. Okay, I'm good. I know I can turn it.
We will support all that, but it's just not available today.
Okay.
One quick thing just to hit on those points. So for extensible resources, as Sydney mentioned, those are not able to be managed by a stack today, but we're doing the work to enable that. So when that becomes available later this year, what is going to end up being possible is you can manage these intro IDs and delete groups, delete service principals, all via the controls we demoed with stacks. But then there will be, I guess, some searching of what are the next priorities for all of you. So we showed the Kubernetes preview. We mentioned Key Vault secrets, which is a very common thing that needs to get deleted that can't be deleted easily today. But I heard ADO, I heard GitHub. If there's anything else that comes to mind that, hey, I would love to be able to represent this resource in Bicep, please feel free to reach out to us and let us know, because it'll help us with that. What's the team we have to hound next to help us get them to build the provider with us?
Yeah, I'll go here.
Yeah, the question was, what can we do to break up the monolith app gateway resource type? Because I think that one actually has references to itself inside of it, which is a nightmare. The reality is that Azure a lot of it is like legacy software, and it has to be supported. So there's these resource types, especially for like the key like IaaS primitives like networking, VMs, things of that nature that are very, very hard to change. So it's unlikely that anything major will happen. If we complain loud enough, maybe eventually. Like we did fix the VNets and subnets API this year, which was also a big nightmare that we actually were able to convince them to fix. So we can build up the campaign and we can keep working on it.
Yeah.
What's that? Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, and to that point, that's a great like segue into how to stay connected with us. And as you may have heard us say before, to like customer verbatims or like specifics as to like how that's impacting you, maybe scenarios that it's blocking you from or that sort of thing are really great to share with us so we can pass along to the appropriate folks. But yeah, love that. And I will mention here as well that Bicep is open source. So if you are coming across feature requests, bugs, that sort of thing, please go to this repo. It's just in the Azure organization and then Bicep. So you should be able to find it. And it's so valuable to us when you go ahead and create an issue, because then we can follow up with you, track it all the way through the development process. Whereas as much as I love it when you come tell me you want me to fix something, I have no way of getting back to you if I have more questions later on. Mentioned we have a community call. There's actually one coming up next week, 9 a.m. on the 17th. Unfortunately, a little overlap with the PowerShell call, but I'm going to try and make both, and hopefully some of you all can as well, to get on the distribution list, aka.ms/armnews. And then, again, I'll just keep pointing to the documentation as a great starting place if you have questions. Yeah. Okay. Oh, okay, never mind. But yeah, so this is, if you're on the Kubernetes page, there's like one link above that'll say like Microsoft Graph on the side pane here. Then it'll take you to this page. And then it's the quick starts, explore additional quick starts. But if you want to just go directly to the resource on GitHub, it's in this repo. I'll scroll up because that'll be easier to see. Microsoft Graph is the organization on GitHub, and then msgraph-bicep-types. And there's a file there, quick start templates, that has all of them there. Yeah.
All right. So what if V2, or I guess what if in general? There's a lot of stuff happening in what if right now. I am going to talk about what we refer to with that V2 comment first. So the existing deployment what if API, how many of y'all use it today? Okay, sweet. How many of you have noticed that it can be a bit noisy sometimes? Okay. How many of you have noticed that sometimes you felt what if should have been evaluated on something and it didn't get evaluated? Okay, so those two problems are known as, one, the noise problem, second, the short-circuiting issue. So we're already have designs on what we're gonna do to fix both. The short-circuiting one is in process of getting rolled out. So what's gonna happen here is, for all of the templates that you have or Bicep files where you had modules, these modules end up creating nested deployments. And sometimes the timeout just was expiring and what if wasn't being evaluated on those nested deployments. So all of a sudden you're getting a what if that says everything's okay, and then you deploy stuff and it's not okay, and that was on us, just dealing with that short circuiting. So that one was deployed, but there was a bug, so we rolled it back, and now we're on the process of rolling it back out. So I'm hoping within the next couple of weeks to a month max. And I say this that loosely because our deployment trains have been kind of in flux these past couple of weeks. Within a couple of weeks, you'll have that short-circuiting fix already available. So that's one part of V2. Second part is noise reduction. How do we remove all these noisy properties, or at least give you a flag to get you a result with noise removed and one with the full response? Because I know some folks are going to want to get the full response. That one we already have designs on, but the work hasn't started yet because Stack's what if needs to happen first. So we can incorporate Stack's what if into V2 if you want. I already have a huge confusion in my head because internally we talk about these things just as what if, but they're like 3 separate projects. So Stack's what if is the next one, which is, how do we give you not just the regular what if you have today, but now the before and after of the stack properties whenever you're doing a stack deployment? So noise reduction is going to be based off of the design of Stack's what if. Because since Stack captures that intermediate state, we'll have a little bit more to work with in seeing what happened before and what's actually a noisy property. That one noise reduction hasn't been started yet because we're working on Stacks what if right now. So another part of that is Stacks what if, and enabling that first to then give you a better noise reduction story with what if. Any other questions around what if and future stuff there?
When will we roughly have noise reduction available?
I would say we can expect noise reduction around September of this year, hopefully sooner. We're trying our best to parallelize as many of the efforts as we can, but since some of these things have very crude dependencies, like until the Stacks What If API exists, we can't really do other work for noise reduction. Some stuff just has to land in sequence. But as we go through this, and if there is a preview that becomes available, make sure to reach out and invite you all to preview that as soon as it's there. We're optimistically hoping that the noise reduction effort is going to handle the 90% case of noise. And there will still be stragglers, edge cases there. But this has been an effort that has kind of grown as the cloud continued to grow. Like we made what if available, and then we started tracking noise, but then the pace of resource types becoming available on Azure was faster than our own team's ability to like track the noise. And then it just got way out of hand. And Shenglong was holding down the fort for a good like 2 to 3 years, just incorporating all the noise himself that was reported in these issues. But what we expect is that the cloud is going to keep growing, and it'll probably be like 1,000 resource types by the time we come back to the summit in 2030. So, but yeah, we're going to keep making improvements to what if. So any kind of suggestion or thing you'd like to see there, feel free to let us know.
Great. And thank you all so much for being here and for staying till the end. I know we're about 5 minutes over time, so I'm going to wrap us up here. I think the only topic we didn't mention is just the migration from ARM templates. All that means is that we're helping enable you to move on to Bicep from ARM. Thank you for being here. Please provide us with any feedback, both on the session and in general.
Thank you, folks.